We are in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. Briefly, and then we will spend our time this morning in Hebrews chapter 12. We are looking at the race that has been set before us. We are looking at the race that has been set before us. Picking up at 11:39. Now, we have seen these examples given to us of those people in the past who have been faithful. 11:39, and these all were commended for their faith, yet they did not receive what was promised. For God has provided something better for us, so that they would be made perfect together with us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, we must get rid of every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and run with endurance the race that is set out for us, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus, the pioneer, the originator, and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy set out for him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand on the throne of God. Think of him who endured such opposition against himself by sinners, so that you may not grow weary in your souls and give up. Well, we have come to that point now where the writer of this letter to the Hebrew church is beginning to wrap up. He's beginning to bring together many different ideas to the conclusion. And so the question before us is, so really what's necessary to do? What do we need to do to follow Jesus? What is this course that you're talking about? What do I need to do to be a faithful follower? We have heard in previous chapters, the beginning of this letter, of course, that Jesus is the ultimate example. He is our ultimate hope. We can't expect angels to help us. Jesus is greater than angels. We have seen in, I suppose now, months ago, that the greatest religious leader, and the example was given to us of Moses, is not superior to Jesus. We need to be fixated. We need to follow Jesus, not religious leaders. We have heard in previous chapters that even those who are functioning in our churches and seminaries, as great as they might be, and the example was Aaron. Jesus is greater than these type of individuals. We need to follow Jesus, not a pope or not some seminary leader. And then we had examples of those who did not follow faithfully, but in chapter 11, those who did. And so we have come to that point as, okay, I need to follow Jesus. What is really necessary? What is it like to follow Jesus? Now, we are likely to spend several weeks on just these few verses. What is it like to follow Jesus? Well, as we begin to examine this, we are faced with, we realize that we are told that this is a specific way that you need to go. There's a specific pathway that you need to travel. Now, most of you, I guess, would know that I ride my bike a lot. And it reminded me several years ago when I was visiting my brother up in Tahoe. He has a vacation home up there. And we were just visiting in the evening, and he said, you know, they do this ride around Tahoe once or twice a year. Now, heart attacks run in my family, so we thought this would be a good way to get in shape. Now, I got to tell you, when you talk about doing 72 miles, this was a bit of a commitment. And it got real when I had to put down the $80. Now, that made it really serious. Up until then, I was thinking about it. But okay, I had to open my wallet and pay for this? Okay, now I'm serious. You know, we went on the computer and we started looking at the route and where the elevation and where the climbs would be. And man, I prepared for that thing. And sure enough, we got out there that morning. It's a race, although they don't have medals or whatnot. But I had decided there was no way I was going to drop out, and I had prepared, and so we took off, and I remember going up Spooner Ridge. If you've ever been up around Lake Tahoe, that's kind of on the eastern side as you come back towards the casinos, and that's the last great elevation. And then you go into this long drop, and I realized I was heading towards the finish line, and it felt like as I was coming down that final drop, man, these lazy people up in Nevada don't clean their road, because I was getting hit with gravel. And then it became apparent to me, that's not gravel, dummy. It's raining, and you're getting hit with sleet. And some people were pulling over, and I thought, I'm already soaked. There's no sense pulling over and standing in the rain. I just kept going. And of course, there's no way you're going to stop. And I thought I would wait for my brother as we got down closer to the casinos, and he just came roaring by me, acting like he reeled me in. In fact, that's the word he used. Well, okay, now the next year, I discovered he was going to ride it again, and so we said, okay, let's do it together, but no, you're not going to catch me this year. And I was in shape again. We rode around Lake Tahoe. I left him on Spooner. And I was at the finish line probably 20, 30 minutes before he got in. Okay? I took care of business. Now, a year or two later, I did it with my oldest son, and I had been doing a lot of things, finishing up at school, and I wasn't quite prepared. And it became really obvious the first 10 miles. Oh, this is not going to be a fun day. And going up Spooner Ridge, I had to stop because my legs were cramping. And I had to stop more than once because my legs were cramping. And I barely finished. I wasn't going to just drop out and have whoever pick up. Oh, my legs were hurting so bad for a week or two after that. I knew the course. You don't take shortcuts. I mean, you can't take shortcuts going around the lake anyway. We have with us this morning motorcycle riders, and I guess if you're going to do a run, you know how you're supposed to do the run. You don't take shortcuts. You don't decide to maybe meander and go some other place. You follow the course set before you. There's so many examples we could use this morning. When you're working out, if you're going to take a daily walk, you keep track of where you're going. You kind of compare, what did I do yesterday? How far do I go today? Some of us weigh ourselves every day. We're keeping track of all of those things. Unfortunately, in a few weeks, we're going to be thinking about filing taxes. You know there's a way to do this. You just can't do whatever you want and decide, hey, I think I'm going to use this as a deduction. Well, it has to be an approved deduction. Well, how is this like following Jesus? Now, this is a very important question. We have many in our culture today who would say, just whatever. It's all up to you how you respond, and you get to decide what you think Jesus is like. We have many today who would think Jesus is some sort of a celestial Santa Claus. All you have to do is specifically name it when you pray, and you'll get it. And he just wants to bless you constantly. You don't even have to do much. Really? So we come to these verses this morning, and we want to see, well, is that really what it's like following Jesus? I just come to church and I pray and tell Jesus this is what I want, a new car or whatever. Well, let's look at verses 39 and 40. It's interesting. We have gone through this list of people who were faithful. And the writer to Hebrews says, now, these people, although they were outstanding, they demonstrated faith, they're obvious examples for us. They didn't receive the finish line. They didn't get to that final place. They didn't receive what was promised. And they couldn't have, because Jesus hadn't come yet. Jesus hadn't come yet. So no matter what kind of faith they had, some of them we would think, well, yeah, Moses, Aaron, those are real examples. Some of the examples, Samson, we were thinking, man, this is kind of an up and down guy. Whatever faith you might have seen for these examples that were given, these were before Jesus, so their faith couldn't have taken them to the final place. For God has provided something better for us. Now, for those of us that have heard about Jesus and we're here this morning, we realize that Jesus is the final answer. And if we're going to make it into His glory, if we are going to spend eternity with Him, it has to be with Jesus. I can't make it to glory because I did something really notable like Gideon or Jephthah or Joshua or Moses. It can only be through Jesus. So in that sense, the truth that we have is what they missed, and now they get perfected with us. We have the final truth. And so we come to verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, we must get rid of every weight and sin that clings so closely to us and run with endurance the race set before us. Now, one quick clarification. These are not people from the Old Testament that are kind of surrounding us and watching how we respond to Jesus and are kind of urging us on. I've heard some people kind of describe it that way. When we're in heaven with the Almighty, we won't be concerned with what's happening here on earth. So these are the Old Testament saints that aren't here to urge us on, but we are to look upon them as an example of how whatever difficulties you're going through, here are people that have gone through challenges. They've taken very significant steps of faith, and we can look at how it was rewarded to them, and we can say, yes, faith in Jesus pays off. That's kind of the lessons that we see in the Old Testament. Being obedient and being faithful, God rewards. But the final reward has to be in Jesus. Well, what is following Jesus really like? Well, Paul has given us several ideas. In Ephesians, Paul says that this is what faith in Jesus is like. Finally, be strengthened in the Lord and in the strength of His power. Put on the full armor of God so that you may be able to withstand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against worldly rulers of darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. For this reason, we take up the full armor of God so that you may be able to stand your ground. And having done everything to stand, stand firm, therefore, by putting on the belt of truth around your waist, by putting on the breastplate of righteousness, by fitting your feet with the preparation that comes with the good news of peace, and in all of this, by taking up the shield of faith, by which you can extinguish the flaming arrows of the evil one. Put on the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Well, wait a minute, Paul. You're telling me that I'm involved in some kind of a battle. This is everyday battle. And it's not a battle I may have with my neighbor because they decided to put on that hideous color. Who would paint their house that color? I don't know if you've had neighbors that do that. Or neighbors that decide to have parties late on Saturday nights. Now, we focus on that. Or perhaps people we know that are politically crazy, whatever you may think that is. And we let those things bother us. Paul is saying, that's not your battle. Because first of all, God's in control of all of that. But you're involved in a spiritual battle. You're involved in a spiritual battle if you're following Jesus, and you need to be prepared for that. You can't do this on your own. You've got spiritual forces who are attacking you constantly. Well, I don't know if I like this, Paul. What's another example? Well, in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, I'm working out constantly. What is it like to be a follower of Jesus? Well, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul says, you need to run. I don't run with uncertainty, but I'm running as one who wants to win. You want to be the one who wins. There's a lot of people in the race, but you want to be that one person who wins? Paul says in 1 Corinthians, also in this same chapter, chapter 9, oh, you think I'm just shadow boxing? I'm not shadow boxing. I'm training to land a body blow against the evil one. That's what this is about. No, you put these ideas together and you think, well, you mean there's expectations and there's standards? I can't just do this any way I want? No, you're in a battle. And the only way you're going to survive the battle is if you follow the Lord's directions. You're not just shadow boxing, you're in a real boxing match and you need to land some body blows against the opposition. This isn't just a spectator sport. So notice what he tells us, and I'm going to have to jump ahead because the way this is put together for us, for emphasis, we have kind of how we are to run our race first, but the idea needs to be, you're in a race. You're in a race. Literally. Seriously. You've started a race. And notice that the course is set before you. Therefore, I'm going to the back part, the final part of verse 1. You've got to run this course that has been set before you with endurance. Now, when you came to know Jesus, you started this race. And we notice that you have to stay on the course. You can't just say, well, I'm a follower of Jesus and I get to do whatever I want. There's expectations here. This started when you began to follow Jesus. When does it end? Well, it ends when you die. You're on the race your entire life, every day, every moment. I can kind of identify with this. I know as I go through my day, there's like constant opportunities where I can reflect His kingdom. Too many times I don't. There's constant opportunities when I don't reflect His kingdom. I'm tripping in the race. I'm getting kind of tangled up. The writer to Hebrews says, first of all, realize you're in a race. You're on the course. You realize that, don't you? Well, here's some directions that we need to understand. We have to stay on the course. Now, he's already given us some very clear ideas. What does it mean to stay on the course? What does it mean to follow the path? Well, we saw in chapter 2, verse 1, you don't drift aside. You don't follow some other path. You don't decide to take a shortcut. You don't get focused on politics. You don't become focused on community service. You don't get involved in denominational things necessarily. You stay on the course. This reminds me, after I rode around Tahoe, a few weeks after that, one year, it was the tour of Modesto. And okay, I was in shape, so my older brother and I did that. Now, I think it works for motorcycles, but if you've ever watched them on the Tour de France, if you get into a group, they call it the peloton, there's a lot less resistance. I'm guessing it works that way with motorcycles. If you're really in the group, Somehow there's just less resistance. You don't feel the wind as much. And so here I was in the Peloton, going through Modesto, the west side of it, somewhere around here. And all of a sudden, I'm going like 10 miles faster than I normally go. And I'm talking to people around me. I'm not out of breath. Well, some guy in front of me wasn't watching what he was doing, and he almost went down, and I had to lock up my wheels. Well, the Peloton left me. Well, now the opposite happened. I have all the resistance. I want to tell you, I stood up on the pedals and I was cranking as hard as I could because I wanted to catch up with them. I couldn't. Well, I was ahead of the main body, but I got to be further and further behind that lead group. And we got to one of the aid stations and they'd already left. And I wanted to catch up with them, so I took off. But here's the illustration. I missed a turn because I wasn't with the group. And all of a sudden, I'm going down a boulevard somewhere out in Modesto someplace, and there's no other bikes around me. And I don't know where I am because I don't know this area. I was so mad at my older brother. Don't you know I'm kind of lost here? And I finally figured out I got another street, a boulevard, and I came over like I went east and caught up with the group. And you get off the course and you don't know where you are. I didn't know where I was. You know, when we're following Jesus, or we thought we were following Jesus, and we get sidetracked on something else, we begin to follow denominations or politics or doing good works. We end up in a place where we have no idea where we are. And we're not headed towards the finish line. We might not even know where the finish line is. You're in a race. You need to make sure that you're staying on course. We've been warned in chapter 4, verse 1. You need to finish. The purpose is to finish the race. Oh, there were, I think, sag wagons that could have picked me up somewhere along the line. Of course, if I was so far off the course, they wouldn't have been looking for me there. There was no way I was going to drop out and have to go back on a bus. I wanted to finish the course. Well, we've gone through this in our life in many different ways. If you've gone to school, you need to finish the course. You don't want to drop out. The writer to Hebrews says you need to stay on the course. Realize that there are very serious consequences to not finishing. And the example was the children of Israel who didn't make it into the promised land. There are serious consequences for not finishing. Chapter 6, verse 1, not only are you to stay on the course, but you are to make every effort. You're to, as we would say, hit your stride. You're getting up to speed and you're really doing it. Chapter 6, verse 1. You need to make sure that you're working towards maturity, is the way we read about it in chapter 6, verse 1. You are progressing towards being more and more like Jesus. Now, if you're doing the race and you're just kind of fooling around and sometimes pedaling, sometimes not, and you never really got up to speed, I got big questions whether you're ever going to get near the finish line. The writer to Hebrews says, realize that's the expectation. You stay on the course. You finish. You hit your speed. You've hit your speed. Now, the uncomfortable question this morning is, have you hit your speed in the race? How far along to maturity have you gotten? You know, you should have been working on that. You're approaching your maximum speed here. Chapter 10, verse 26, you realize the very serious consequences to willfully leaving the course. very serious. The writer to Hebrews says, you realize there is no salvation for people who willfully leave the course. You know where the course is. You know what you should be doing, but you decide you don't want to do that. Well, that's just rebellion. You would never say, yeah, I did the race, but I did it my way. Oh, no, you don't. You would be disqualified. And we keep track of each other that way, don't we? For those of you that finish such races, you might get pens or you get the acknowledgement, yeah, I ran the course. Another one of the bike races up near Tahoe that my brother and I have occasionally talked about was the Death Ride, where you go through 5 of the passes. And they're very, very clear about those who finish, who do all 5 passes. I think it's 15,000 feet of climbing. I've decided, no, I can't do that. You would never say, well, I did one of them, kind of, so I finished the race. No, if you willfully leave the course, you're done. You can't just hop in your car and go to the last pass and say, yep, I'm in the race. If you willfully leave the course, you're out of the race. The writer to Hebrews is saying, realize this, you're in a race. You need to stay on the course. And notice, you need to run with great effort. You need to hit your stride. You need to get up to speed. That word is fascinating. You need to run with endurance. This means, in the original language, it's a fascinating word. The Greeks do this, which drives me really frustrated sometimes. So do the Germans. They'll put together 2 different words to come up with a combined idea. So running with endurance is really 2 different words, endurance. Remaining under. Remaining under. Now this doesn't make sense to us. If I'm really doing well, I shouldn't be under any kind of stress or pressure. I shouldn't be under any kind of pain. The writer to Hebrews is saying, no, if you're on the course, you're remaining under those challenges. You're remaining under the stress. You're remaining under the pain. There will be pain. There will be sacrifices, and you stay under that. You don't say, no, I think the course is easy. It should all be downhill. Notice in all of these examples, notice in the example from Ephesians about being in the battle, notice the example from 1 Corinthians where Paul is running as if to win. And he says, I'm not just beating the air, I'm really going to be boxing with somebody, with the enemy. These all involve real active involvement. You can't just be going through the motions and say that you're on the course. Going through the motions, kind of just showing up, that's not being on the race. You can't be on the sidelines and say, yeah, I come every Sunday. You're in the race. And the end result, I'm thinking about this more and more, unfortunately, because some people say I'm getting older. What does Paul say about the end result? Well, as we are looking kind of at the end, as we are realizing that we're getting older, as perhaps we have come to the doctor's office and heard the news we didn't want to hear, Paul was in this position, 2 Timothy 4:17. Paul says, I have run the good race. I have fought well. I have kept the faith. Now, if that's the end of it, if that's what I'm able to say at the very end of everything, yes, I know I did my best. I did the best I could. I ran the race as well as I could. I don't have any reservations. You know, I gave you the illustrations of riding around Lake Tahoe 3 different ways. To be able to finish the ride and said, that was my best. I know I did my best. We don't want to be in the position like one of my last rides where I don't know how I finished. My legs were cramping. And in our walk with the Almighty, we want to be able to come before His throne and say, I've done my best. And we want to hear those words from Him. Well done, my good and faithful servant. So what are our big ideas this morning? Once again, as we've gone through these few verses in Hebrews and how it ties together, we realize we need to have a really clear idea of King Jesus. He's not some sort of Santa Claus in the sky. If we're following Jesus, we realize that this may cost us something. It's not going to be convenient. It's not going to be easy. That just by following Jesus, we are now in a battle. And I'm going to be evaluated on how well I do that. And the big question this morning, so what choices are you making? Are you staying on the course? Especially for the year ahead. Are you going to try to correct the course? I need to get back on the course. In the year coming up, are you decided, you know, I need to work better at finishing? In the year ahead, have you made the choice that this year you're going to read your Bible more consistently? You're going to spend more time in prayer. You're going to be interacting with each other on a spiritual level so that you can say, I hit my stride. I'm working towards maturity. I'm becoming more Christ-like. What are your choices this year? Some of us have said this year, again, I'm reading through the Bible. I'm going to take it serious. We have this problem in Western culture where we think that's just for the serious people. That's just for people who go to seminary or something. You know, really, church is all about good times and activities. And that may be part of just enjoying each other's fellowship, but the writer to Hebrews tells us here, you know, you're in a race and you will be evaluated on this. You're going to be held accountable to how well you ran. You're going to be held accountable to whether you went off track, how strong you finished. We need to be realistic. No, it's not easy. It's not going to be something that our neighbors are going to applaud us for doing. It's going to be difficult. But we're going to make the choice this year with the help of the Holy Spirit. We're going to do this. We're going to run better this year. I'm going to be better on the course. I'm going to try to hit my stride on a more consistent basis. Again, at the bottom of your notes, faithlight.com. That's a little website that I set up. You can put your prayers there. You can note that we're trying to read through the Bible. There's one plan. Note your questions. A way for us to kind of stay connected with each other. How is this year going to be different than last year? How will this year be more Christ-like for you than last year? How will this year be where you stay on the course more? What are you going to do to make sure that happens? How will this year be a year where you can say, man, I really hit speed this year. I was much more consistent. How is that going to happen? It's going to be a daily decision where you realize this is the course set before me. This is what I'm involved in. I'm not going to get sidetracked. I'm not going to get involved in other things that take me off the course. I'm going to realize that I can only do this through the power of the Holy Spirit for His honor and glory. If I'm trying to do anything on my own, I'm wasting my time. How do you answer that question? How is this year going to be different? How are you going to respond to this being on the course this year? This is probably one of the most important questions you'll have. You're in a race. You know that you've started the race if you're following Jesus. Are you? Are you running with endurance? Are you on the course? Are you headed towards the finish line? Are you running with endurance? You're really putting your effort into it? Or do you need to make some changes? You know, if you need to make some changes, you want some help, you want me to pray with you. Don't leave this morning before we take care of that. Let's pray. Our Father, so often we would like to make this something far more easier, something convenient, something that just is all about benefiting me. We so easily want to ignore